So for this top 5 video, I figured I'd do gaming in the 90s, the 5 things that I missed the most from that time era. Now, I haven't been born in 1987. By the time the 90s came around, I was already, young. I was into, the ColecoVision, the Genesis, the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo. I was in there. I was in the prime time to be young and playing games, when all these systems were coming out. All the games were marketed towards my age group. So, I'm going to have some things I missed about it. So, number 5, my most missed thing about the 90s would be the amount of gaming mascots that there were. I mean, sure they still exist today, with Sonic and Mario, and to some extent, some of the older ones are still around, but not as they used to be depicted. You had weird characters like Zool, you had Bubsy, Rayman. After Sega saw the success of Mario and how well he did for Nintendo, they decided to create Sonic. Now, after Sonic, the other developers and other companies said, wow, they made this really cool, hip character that all the kids identify with, and they're selling a lot of games. But, Sonic didn't just sell because of his character. They were great games themselves. So all these other companies decided to come out and make their own characters, and ultimately it created this big frenzy of all these different furry animals, extreme animals, weird-looking mascots coming out from all these different platforms, just hoping to be the next big hit. So you had ones like I said, Rayman, and you had Sparkster from Rocket Knight Adventures. You had Bug on the Sega Saturn. Even Bomberman, even though he's still around today, he was still Hudson's, little mascot guy, still is. And you had ones like Glover and Gex and B.O.B. Bob, which was some weird one on the Sega Genesis. You had Sega even attempted Alex Kidd before Sonic himself, before Sonic became their official mascot. I mean, even today, there are still mascots out there, like Master Chief is Xbox's mascot, and I think Sony's finally making Sackboy their mascot. Nintendo obviously still has Mario and multiple ones like Link and Kirby and all that kind of stuff. But back then, there was just a whole multitude of characters that I really do miss. I mean, I used to have a lot of fun looking at all these different characters and just being like, I'm gonna buy that game because he looks pretty cool, but I do miss that a lot. So coming in at number 4 would be social gaming. Now, what do I mean by social gaming? I mean, back then, before the Dreamcast, I'm not even going to count the Dreamcast because honestly, no one really went online with the Dreamcast. But back then, if you wanted to play with friends, you'd be like, hey, can I come over? Let's play some Smash Brothers. Let's play some, 2-player Super Mario or something. Nowadays it's like, you text someone on AIM. It's like, want to play some Resistance 2? Alright, I'll see you online at this time. And you just pop online and play. Back then, anytime you wanted to play with someone, you'd have to, get over their house. And, it still exists today with the Wii, but come on, people. I mean, if you're going to play, like, Halo or something, you're most likely going to do it online. Online gaming has advanced us beyond the point where developers now even are leaving out single-player completely. I mean, you look at games like SOCOM on the PlayStation 3, and you look at most multiplayer games where they kind of don't care about the single-player experience anymore, and they're just gearing it towards online. So, I used to miss having 4-player Nintendo 64 Smash Brothers battles, and, 2-player co-op in, like, Golden Axe or something. I mean, it's still online, but the whole fact of being in the same room together and playing is kind of gone now. Number 3 would have to be the range of systems that existed. I mean, back then, now it's just, Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony. Back then, you had all these different companies competing. You had systems like the Atari putting out the Jaguar. You had Panasonic putting out the 3DO. You had the Philips CDI. You had all these different systems. Even SNK putting out the Neo Geo. I mean, all these different systems, these companies competing against each other. And, you'd go into a game store, and it wouldn't just be your typical game systems. They'd have a wide range of systems by different companies, and most people are probably like, who cares, we got the 3 to pick from now. But I used to enjoy, when a new different system would come out, and I would go to the stores and see all the different games that they had for it. I mean, even the handhelds, you had the Neo Geo Pocket, and even Sega putting out, the Nomad, which I love, taking Genesis games on the go. You had the TurboGrafx, all these different systems, which is gone now. Any company that tries to come into the current gaming industry in hopes of competing with the three that are out there now, it's not going to happen. So the age of all these different systems is gone. For number 2, it would have to be the fact that back then, when you went to go get a new game, you would have to go to a gaming store like Funkoland, and you would base your purchases off of, cover art. So number 2 would have to be the absence of the fun of going into game stores and having a look at all around. I mean, it still exists today, but when you go into a GameStop, you know what game you want. You probably read reviews on it, you're going in there, you know exactly what one you want, unless you're kind of like me sometimes and you go in there and you're like, oh, that looks pretty good, I'll buy it because I like the box. I still do that today sometimes, but back then you'd go into a Funkoland and you'd basically look at the games. The cover art was very important, because if you saw a cool looking cover, despite how crappy that game was, you'd look at the back and say, yeah, I'm gonna buy this, and boom, you'd buy it for 40 or 50 bucks. You get home, and if you were a kid, it really didn't matter, you'd probably like the game anyway. But, it was just the whole fact of you based your game purchases off of what you saw in the game stores. Maybe a magazine, you'd see something in a magazine, some screenshots, and you'd rush out to the stores and see if you can find it. But back then, really, the internet wasn't huge in terms of what it is today, and especially television. You would rely on commercials and magazines, and that was about it. The internet, back in, especially in the early 90s, I mean late 90s, yeah, the internet was kind of starting to come into play with the gaming purchases, but early 90s, forget about it. If you were going into a game store, you were really just going in there for, like I said, to browse and come out with an unexpected game, which might turn out to be one of your favorite games ever, So, number 1. This is probably going to come as a surprise to a lot of you, actually. So, out of everything in the 90s, what do I miss the most? The Sega Channel. For those of you that never had the privilege of playing Sega Channel when it first came out between 1994 and 1998 when it was shut down, you really missed out on one of the coolest things ever in gaming history. I mean, sure, some of you are probably like, but what, we got Xbox Live Arcade now, we got the Virtual Console. Yeah, but think of this, the service came out at a time when none of that kind of stuff existed. You would, basically how it works is you would get the Sega Channel, it was a box, it was like a pretty big cartridge, you'd put it in your Sega Genesis, you'd hook up your cable to it, from your cable television, and every month you would have about 50 new games to play. You would turn on your system, a list would come up of different categories. Here's the adventure games, here's the fantasy RPG games, here's the sports games, here's the special games or whatever, and then you'd click on a category and a list of games would come up. You'd click on a game, it would take about a minute to load, and you'd be playing a full-fledged game on your TV. I mean, come on. Even today, we don't really have anything like that. We gotta pay $5 or $10 for a game, like on the Virtual Console and Xbox Live Arcade or the PlayStation Network. It was unheard of. It was like, I was amazed when it was my birthday, my parents were like, what do you want for your birthday? Birthday party with your friends, or do you want the Sega Channel? Sega Channel, that's what I wanted. And man, when I turned that thing on, every month it would refresh with 50 games, some of them would repeat. And I mean, back then, I didn't realize, but they had exclusive games on there that never made it to America, like Golden X3, Pulseman, and even I think Dr. Wily Wars for the Mega Man game that never made it to the States either. But basically, it's like having a library, an ever-changing library of Genesis games at your fingertips. And back then it was $15 a month. With, yes, there's inflation now, but that really wasn't that much for the amount of games that you were getting. And it was really, really cool. To have that, because then I wouldn't have to go out to the stores or beg my parents or save my money for those 50, 60, upwards of $70 Genesis games that were out there. I mean, imagine if Super Nintendo had something like this. Like I said, yes, we have something similar to it now, but this was a subscription-based games program that was out in the early 90s. Can't get any better than that. I totally miss it. I wish it was still around, and that's my number 1 pick for the thing that I missed the most in the 1990s.